On March 25, 2017, J. Vic Brown Jr. will be inducted into the Alaska Aviation Museum's Hall of Fame in recognition of his many years as one of the entrepreneur pilots and builders in Alaska's aviation industry. We are honored to present this recognition and reward to Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was born June 23, 1923 in Fairbanks, Alaska. Mr. Brown's parents first came to Alaska in 1914, first living in Juneau before moving to Fairbanks in 1917. His first flight came at an early age while accompanying his mother.
They were friendlies with Ben Eielson, Colonel Ben Eielson, and they asked my mother to go for a plane ride, and she said, well, if she was going to die, she wanted to die with her son, and that was me, and I think I was about 3 years old.
In 1929, the Brown family moved to Anchorage to open J. Vic Brown and Sons Jewelers. At the age of 16, Mr. Brown took his first flight lessons. His instructor, Eddie Bowman of Christensen Air Service, taught Mr. Brown using a 1938 Aeronca Chief. Mr. Brown was a freshman at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, with 6.5 hours of flight time when the U.S. Army Air Corps drafted him, and he eventually qualified for pilot training. As flight instructor, he flew P-40s, B-25s, DC-3s, and C-54s. By the end of the war, Mr. Brown was married to his Anchorage High School sweetheart, Marie Laurie Brown, had their first child, and was ready to return home to Alaska. Mr. Brown worked hard to grow the family jewelry business, but aviation was always at the forefront of his mind. A chance encounter with Clyde Lewis, commander of the small but growing Civil Air Patrol unit, drew his interest. Mr. Brown joined the Civil Air Patrol, serving his fellow pilots in a more formal capacity. Through the years, Mr. Brown rose through the ranks. He was named Squadron Commander in 1962. Mr. Brown received the Air Search and Rescue Award in both 1962 and 1963, retiring after many years of service in 1975.
In those days, they had a Super Cub and a Navion, which is both single-engine airplanes, and the hangar. There was no hangar at that time, and just a Quonset hut.
Early on, Mr. Brown spearheaded the campaign to grow the Civil Air Patrol in Anchorage, soliciting support from generous donors and from those who were served by the CAP's efforts. The result was a new operations center, constructed without any public funding and still used. At the same time as this campaign, the U.S. Air Force donated 10 de Havilland Beavers, which proved to be the backbone of the Anchorage Squadron for more than 50 years. When the Good Friday earthquake struck in 1964, the CAP was quick to utilize these new aircraft and dedicated pilots to ferry medical supplies and other materials to communities in need. Mr. Brown and his fellow pilots spent hundreds of hours as first responders, flying the first flights to survey damage and ferry supplies to communities, some without roads or airports. Through Mr. Brown's efforts and those of other CAP pilots, the organization grew from a small group of dedicated airmen to a highly organized network across the state of Alaska. The CAP grew from a humble hangar into a wing with 3 groups headquartered in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. The Alaska Aviation Museum gratefully acknowledges the contributions Mr. Brown made to Alaska's aviation history and welcomes him into the Alaska Aviation Hall of Fame.